The stars above Haven Colony flickered and died, one by one. It wasn't a natural darkness. The Vakrian warships had arrived, dozens of them, blocking out the night sky with their massive hulls. Supreme Commander Thexvan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Dawn, watching the small human settlement through the viewing screens. The colony looked peaceful, almost defenseless. Small buildings clustered together, surrounded by farmland and simple defensive walls. Nothing impressive. Nothing that should take more than a day to conquer. Thexvan had been a soldier for 200 years. He had conquered 17 worlds for the Vakrian Empire. This would be his 18th, and possibly the easiest. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy, barely 50 years since they had developed faster than light travel. Their weapons were crude, their tactics simple, their territory small. The intelligence reports said Haven Colony had fewer than 3,000 people, mostly farmers and their families. The defense force numbered maybe 200 soldiers, poorly trained and equipped with outdated rifles. All ships in position, Supreme Commander, his second officer reported. The bridge crew worked efficiently, their scaled hands moving across control panels. Everything was going according to plan. Establish the blockade, Thexvan ordered. No ships leave the surface. Cut their communications. Let them know they are surrounded. The Vakrian fleet moved into formation, a perfect sphere around the planet. Heavy cruisers took the high orbit positions. Smaller gunships descended lower, ready to provide air support when the ground invasion began. Troop transports waited in the rear, carrying 20,000 Vakrian soldiers. It was overwhelming force against a tiny target. Thexvan felt almost sorry for the humans. They would see the fleet and know immediately that resistance was pointless. By this time tomorrow, Haven Colony would be flying the Vakrian banner, and the Third Fleet would move on to the next target. Simple. Clean. Professional. Supreme Commander. A voice called from the communications station. It was Vrel, his intelligence officer. Vrel was younger than most of the command staff, only 60 years old, but sharp and cautious. We have intercepted colony communications. Let me hear it, Thexvan said. Static crackled through the bridge speakers, then a human voice, speaking their strange language. The translation software converted it immediately. This is Haven Colony Defense Coordinator Lee Bonhua to all stations. Vakrian fleet detected in orbit. All civilians move to designated shelters. Defense forces report to positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Thexvan listened to the organized chaos. Humans shouting orders, children crying. The sound of emergency sirens. Normal sounds of a colony facing invasion. Then another voice came through, calmer than the others, speaking with authority. Defense Coordinator, this is Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun. Thexvan's ears perked up. A military operative. That was interesting, though not concerning. One soldier wouldn't change anything. Kang Dae-hyun? Vrel said suddenly. Supreme Commander. That name appears in our database. Of course it does, Thexvan replied. We have files on most human military personnel. What's his rank? Staff Sergeant, United Earth Defense Force. Currently on leave, visiting family at Haven Colony. Vrel paused, reading something on his screen. Sir, his file is marked with several security flags. What kind of flags? High-value target. Combat specialist. Multiple commendations. Vrel's voice carried a note of worry. Sir, I recommend we pull his full combat record before we proceed. Sported. Son. Under combat record. Sported for. Thexvan almost laughed. You want to delay an invasion because one sergeant is on vacation here? Vrel. We outnumber them 50 to 1. We have orbital superiority and heavy weapons. One human soldier changes nothing. With respect, Supreme Commander, the flags suggest he is not an ordinary soldier. Thexvan sighed. Vrel was careful, sometimes too careful, but his caution had saved lives before. Fine. Pull the record, but make it quick. I want to begin the ground assault before nightfall. The intelligence officer worked in silence for several minutes. The bridge crew continued their preparations. Troop transports moved into position. Assault teams checked their equipment. Everything was ready. And then Vrel made a sound. It was hard to describe, something between a hiss and a gasp. Thexvan had never heard his intelligence officer make that sound before. "What is it?" the Supreme Commander asked. "Sir, you need to see this." Vrel transferred data to the main viewing screen. "This is Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun's service record." The screen filled with text. Thexvan began reading, expecting to see a standard military file. Service dates, training courses, unit assignments, the usual information. But as he read further, his confidence began to crack. 73 combat deployments. 73. Most Vakrian soldiers never saw more than 10 or 15 combat situations in their entire careers. This human had participated in 73, 12 hostile worlds. The human had fought on 12 different planets, in 12 different environments, against 12 different enemy forces. Unit survival rate, 94% in high casualty scenarios. Thexvan read that line 3 times. It meant that when this human led soldiers into battle, even in situations where most of them should have died, 94% survived. That wasn't just luck. That was skill. That was experience. That was dangerous. "Scroll down," Thexvan ordered. The incident reports appeared. Each one was brief, but the details were shocking. One report described how Kang Dae-hyun had held a fortified position alone for 16 hours against continuous enemy attacks. Alone, for 16 hours. Without food, without relief, without backup. He had held the position until reinforcements arrived. Another report mentioned a night operation where he had infiltrated an enemy command bunker using only demolition charges and a knife. A knife. He had killed 18 enemy soldiers with a knife and destroyed their command structure. A third report detailed how he had led 8 soldiers in defending a colony against 400 raiders. The math was insane. 8 against 400. But they had held. They had actually held until help arrived. "This can't be accurate," one of the bridge officers said. "These numbers must be exaggerated. Humans lie about their victories." "The reports come from their official military database," Vrel said quietly. "We cracked their encryption. This is verified information." Thexvan kept reading. There were commendations, medals, letters of recognition from human commanders, but what caught his attention was a single line near the end of the file, marked with the highest security clearance. Operation Broken Chain. Colonial Defense Specialist Kang demonstrated level Omega persistence protocols. Psychological evaluation. Subject exhibits controlled battlefield dissociation. Recommendation: deploy only in terminal scenarios. "What does that mean?" Thexvan asked. "Level Omega persistence protocols?" Vrel checked his translation database. "It's difficult to translate precisely. The closest equivalent in our language would be, the subject does not stop, regardless of injury, exhaustion, or odds. The subject continues fighting until the objective is achieved, or the subject is killed." Thexvan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard rumors about humans. Stories passed between Vakrian soldiers who had encountered them on the frontier. Humans were strange. They didn't quit when they should. They fought past their breaking point. They did things that made no logical sense. He had dismissed those stories as exaggeration, the kind of tales soldiers told to make their enemies seem more dangerous. But now, looking at this combat record, he wondered if the stories had been understatements. "Pull all available data on human combat psychology," Thexvan ordered. "I want to know what we're dealing with." "Yes, Supreme Commander." The bridge fell silent. Outside, the Vakrian fleet waited in perfect formation. The ground assault teams were ready. Victory seemed certain. but Thexvan stared at the name on the screen. Staff Sergeant Kang Daehyun. One human. One very dangerous human. And he was down there. One day, end, one, somewhere in that colony, preparing to defend it. The Supreme Commander had a strange feeling. Something he hadn't experienced in decades of warfare. It took him a moment to identify it. These, endidation, doubt, Thexvan couldn't sleep. He had returned to his private quarters hours ago, but his mind kept returning to that combat record. Staff Sergeant Kang Daehyun, the name repeated in his thoughts like a warning bell. He had ordered his intelligence division to compile everything they had on human military tactics, psychology, and combat behavior. The report would be ready by morning. Morning came too quickly. Thexvan arrived at the briefing room to find his senior officers already gathered. General Crix, Commander of Ground Forces. Admiral Toss, Naval Operations. Colonel Vrel, Intelligence. And a dozen others, all veterans of numerous campaigns. They sat around the long metal table, confident and relaxed. They didn't understand why the Supreme Commander had called this meeting. To them, the invasion was already won. "Thank you for coming," Thexvan began. "I've called you here to discuss our target, Haven Colony." General Crix said, "Supreme Commander, with respect, there's nothing to discuss. We land at dawn. We overwhelm their defenses. The colony surrenders by midday. I've run the simulations a dozen times. We'll suffer minimal casualties, perhaps 20 or 30 soldiers wounded. None killed. That was my assessment as well," Thexvan said. "Until yesterday, he activated the main display." Kang Daehyun's service record appeared. The same information he had reviewed the previous night. The officers leaned forward, reading. 73 deployments, Admiral Toss said slowly. "That seems excessive." It's not excessive for humans," Vrel said. He had been working through the night, and it showed. His scales looked dull, his eyes tired. "I've reviewed hundreds of human military files. Their soldiers are deployed far more frequently than ours. But this one, Staff Sergeant Kang, he's different. He's not a regular soldier. He's what they call a specialist." "Specialist in what?" General Crix asked. "Impossible situations," Vrel answered. "Look at his deployment history. Every single assignment was to a location under imminent attack, outnumbered, undersupplied, or considered lost. They send him to places where victory seems impossible. And somehow, he keeps winning." The room fell quiet. Officers scrolled through the reports on their personal displays. Thexvan watched their faces change as they read. Confidence became concern. Concern became worry. "This report about the fortified position," Colonel Mex said. "Holding alone for 16 hours against a Kresh warpack? The Kresh don't retreat. They attack until they're all dead, or the enemy is dead." "According to the report," Vrel said, "he used environmental advantages, created false positions to divide their attention, and employed psychological warfare. The Kresh eventually believed they were facing a much larger force and withdrew to regroup. By then, human reinforcements had arrived. Clever, Admiral Tos admitted. But luck plays a role in war. Perhaps he's just been lucky. 73 times? Vrel asked. Sir, I've analyzed probability. The chances of surviving 73 high-risk combat situations through luck alone are mathematically insignificant. This is skill. This is experience. This is someone who has learned how to win when winning should be impossible. Thexvan stood up. There's more. I've asked Vrel to compile data on other human combat operations. Situations where humans faced overwhelming odds. Vrel, please share what you found. The intelligence officer pulled up a new file. I've identified 12 significant battles where human forces were outnumbered at least 10 to 1. In all 12 cases, The human forces either won or inflicted such severe casualties on the enemy that the victory was meaningless. "Give us examples," General Crick said. His voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The siege of Outpost Gamma," Vrel began. 12 human marines against a pirate fleet of 43 ships. The pirates had superior numbers, weapons, and ships. They should have overwhelmed the outpost in hours. Instead, the Marines used mining equipment to create improvised weapons, disabled 17 ships with electromagnetic charges, and created a debris field that made approach extremely dangerous. The siege lasted 6 days. When human reinforcements arrived, the pirates had lost 37 ships and fled. The Marines had no casualties. "Impossible," someone muttered. "There's more," Vrel continued. "The incident at Kepler Station. Boarding action. 80 enemy soldiers against a station with no military personnel. There was a human doctor there, though. Dr. Park Ji-won. She used medical supplies to create chemical weapons. Toxic gas, acidic compounds, even biological agents. She killed 40 elite shock troops using nothing but medicine. The remaining forces retreated in panic. The officers shifted uncomfortably. These stories didn't sound like military operations. They sounded like nightmares. "The Battle of Red Canyon," Vrel went on. "A human supply convoy was ambushed by 200 raiders. The convoy had 30 soldiers as guards. Standard protocol would be to abandon the supplies and retreat. The humans didn't retreat. They used the supply vehicles as fortifications, turned fuel into bombs, and fought for 11 hours. 28 of the 30 soldiers survived. All 200 raiders were killed." "Why didn't they retreat?" Admiral Tos asked. "Why fight when escape was possible?" "That's the question I kept asking," Vrel said. "So I dug deeper into human psychology. What I found is disturbing. Humans have a biological response to danger that other species don't have. When most species face overwhelming threat, their instinct is to flee or freeze. Humans have a third option: fight harder. That's suicide," General Crick said. "Sometimes," Vrel agreed. "But often, it works. Humans produce adrenaline, a chemical that increases strength, dulls pain, and sharpens focus. They can fight through injuries that would incapacitate us. They can function on no sleep for days. They can push their bodies past normal limits. And they have something else. Something harder to quantify." "What?" Thexvan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "They don't accept defeat," Vrel said simply. "It's cultural, psychological, maybe even genetic. Humans have a concept they call never give up. It sounds simple, but in practice, it's terrifying. They will try everything, every possible tactic, every desperate strategy, every insane idea, and occasionally, impossibly, it works." The briefing room was silent. Thex Van let the information sink in. These were experienced officers, veterans of many wars. They understood what they were hearing. "There's a phrase in the human military," Vrel continued. "They say humans don't know when to quit. Our intelligence division believed this was propaganda. Now, I think it's a warning." General Crix cleared his throat. "Supreme Commander, with respect. These are interesting stories. But we still have overwhelming numerical and technological advantage. Even if this Staff Sergeant Kang is as dangerous as his record suggests, he's one soldier. We have 20,000. "I thought the same thing," Thexvan said. "So I asked Vrel to run combat simulations." "Vrel?" "Vrel." The intelligence officer pulled up new data. "I created 3 scenarios. First scenario: standard invasion. Staff Sergeant Kang does nothing special. Colony defenders fight conventionally. Result: we win with less than 5% casualties. Second scenario: Kang trains the civilian population in basic combat, implements guerrilla tactics, uses environmental advantages. Result: We win, but casualties increase to 28%. And the third scenario? Admiral Toss asked. Vrel hesitated. Third scenario. Kang implements the tactics from his combat record. Psychological warfare, false positions, improvised weapons, civilian integration into defense network, and what the humans call asymmetric warfare. Result. We win. But projected casualties are 63%. The room erupted. Officers shouted questions, argued about the numbers, demanded to see the simulation parameters. Thexvan let them argue for a few minutes, then raised his hand for silence. 63% casualties, he repeated. That means more than 12,000 soldiers dead or wounded to capture one small colony. Does that sound like victory to anyone here? No one answered. There's something else, Vrel said quietly. I found a report in the human database. It's labeled Assessment of Human Combat Psychology for Allied Forces. It was written by a human military analyst named Dr. Cho Minho. He was trying to explain human behavior to alien allies. One section caught my attention. Vrel pulled up the text and read aloud. Human soldiers do not fight the same way in all situations. When humans believe retreat is possible, they fight cautiously and follow standard military doctrine. When humans believe they are going to die anyway, they fight without restraint. This shift in psychology makes humans exponentially more dangerous when cornered. Recommendation. Always leave human forces a path to retreat. Never trap them completely. We've trapped them completely, Admiral Toss said softly. Our blockade ensures no escape. Thexvan nodded. Exactly. We've created the exact scenario that makes humans most dangerous. And we've done it in a colony where one of their most experienced combat specialists happens to be visiting his family. General Crick stared at his display. What are you suggesting, Supreme Commander? Thexvan looked at each officer in turn. I'm suggesting we reconsider this operation. Not because we can't win. We can. But because victory might cost us more than it's worth. The briefing room fell into troubled silence. Outside, the Vakrian fleet waited, ready to attack. But inside this room, doubt had taken root. The argument lasted 3 hours. General Crix insisted they had come too far to turn back. Admiral Tos worried about what retreat would signal to other species. Colonel Mex pointed out that their honor was at stake. But Thexvan noticed something interesting. Despite their words, none of them volunteered to lead the ground assault personally. None of them wanted to be the first one facing Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun. We need more information, Thexvan finally said. Vrel, contact Vakrion High Command. Request all intelligence on human military strategy, not just tactics, but their overall approach to warfare. I want to understand how they think. Yes, Supreme Commander. While Vrel worked, Thexvan studied the colony through long-range sensors. Haven Colony looked peaceful, despite the fleet in orbit. Buildings arranged in neat rows, agricultural fields stretching to the horizon, a small spaceport with a handful of civilian ships. It didn't look like a military target. It looked like a home. That bothered him. Why would the United Earth Defense Force station a combat specialist here? Kang Dae-hyun was on leave, yes, but his presence seemed too convenient. Too perfect. One of humanity's most dangerous soldiers just happened to be at a vulnerable colony when the Vakrian fleet arrived? Vrel, Thexvan said. How long has Kang Dae-hyun been at Haven Colony? The intelligence officer checked his data. 3 weeks, sir. He arrived on a transport from Earth. And how long has our fleet been planning this operation? 6 weeks. We've been moving into position for... Vrel stopped. His scales shifted color, turning pale. Sir, the humans couldn't have known we were coming. Our operation was classified. Are you certain? Thexvan asked. Vrel worked frantically at his console. Minutes passed. The other officers watched, confused. Finally, Vrel looked up. Supreme Commander, I've checked our communication logs, our ship movements, everything. There's no evidence of information leaks. But what? Sir, I've also checked human military movements over the past 3 months. They've been repositioning combat specialists to frontier colonies. Small deployments. 1 or 2 soldiers per location. Officially, the humans call it extended leave rotation. Dexvan felt his suspicion growing. How many colonies? 47, sir. All within our expansion zone. All colonies that we've identified as potential targets. The briefing room went silent. Admiral Toss leaned forward. They knew. They didn't know specifically about Haven Colony. But they knew we were planning to expand. So they seeded their frontier with combat specialists. They turned every vulnerable colony into a trap. It's brilliant, Colonel Mech said quietly. It costs them almost nothing. Just reassign some soldiers, call it vacation, and wait. If we attack any of those colonies, we face experienced fighters. If we don't attack, they've lost nothing but some travel expenses. General Crix shook his head. That's not military strategy. That's gambling. They're betting that a few dangerous soldiers will make us hesitate. And it's working, Thexvan said. We're hesitating. A communication alert interrupted them. Vrel answered it, then turned to Thexvan. Sir, Vakrion High Command is responding to our intelligence request. They're sending encrypted files now. Data flooded into the ship's systems. Reports on human conflicts, psychological profiles, strategic assessments. Thexvan began reading, and what he found made his earlier concerns seem small. The humans had been at war for most of their existence. Not just with aliens, but with each other. Their planet had seen thousands of wars, millions of battles. They had developed weapons that could destroy their entire world. They had actually used some of those weapons on themselves. And somehow, they had survived. Listen to this, Thexvan said, reading from a report. Human military doctrine is based on a concept called total war. When humans commit to conflict, they don't just deploy soldiers. They mobilize their entire society. Factories convert to weapon production. Civilians support the military effort. Resources are redirected to the war effort. They don't fight battles. They fight with everything they have. That's insane, General Crix said. War should be controlled. Professional armies fighting under rules of engagement. What the Supreme Commander describes is chaos. It's effective chaos, Vrel said. He was reading a different report. Sir, I'm looking at a case study. 200 years ago, humans fought what they call the Third World War. The conflict lasted 15 years. 40% of their industrial capacity was destroyed. 60 million humans died. But they kept fighting. They rebuilt factories under bombardment. They trained new soldiers from children and elderly. They never stopped. How did they survive as a species? Admiral Toss asked. Because both sides refused to give up, Vrel answered. The war only ended when both sides were so exhausted that continuing meant extinction. Even then, the peace negotiations took 3 years, because neither side wanted to admit defeat. Thexvan continued reading. The reports painted a disturbing picture. Humans were not logical about warfare. They didn't calculate cost versus benefit the way Vakrian commanders did. They became emotional, angry, determined, and those emotions made them unpredictable. One report caught his attention. It was titled, Human Response to Overwhelming Force. The author was a Vakrian military observer who had witnessed a human conflict on a colony world called New Dublin. The report described a situation where human rebels were surrounded by a superior military force. The rebels had no chance of victory. Standard military logic said they should surrender and negotiate terms. Instead, they fought for 6 months. They used every dirty trick imaginable. Poisoned water supplies, booby-trapped buildings, suicide attacks, psychological warfare. By the time they were finally defeated, the attacking force had lost 70% of its strength. The report's conclusion was simple. Never give humans the impression that they have nothing to lose. A human who expects to die anyway becomes more dangerous than any weapon. We need to discuss something, Thex Van said to his officers. Vrel, show them the map. And a star chart appeared on the main display. It showed Vakrian territory in blue, human territory in green, and neutral zones in gray. The Vakrian Empire was much larger, but something about the map troubled Thex Van. Look at the human expansion pattern, he said. In 50 years, they've colonized 42 worlds. That's slower than our expansion rate. But look at the location of their colonies. Admiral To studied the map. They're spread out, not concentrated. Each colony is positioned to support multiple trade routes. Exactly, Thex Van said. Now look at their military bases. Red markers appeared on the map, indicating human military installations. There were surprisingly few of them, but each one was positioned to respond quickly to multiple colonies. They're not building an empire, Colonel Mex realized. They're building a network. Each piece supports the others. If we attack one colony, forces from 3 or 4 bases can respond. And that's not all, Vrel added. I've analyzed human supply lines. They're decentralized. Each colony has its own manufacturing capacity. Unlike our supply chain, which depends on central production facilities, humans can build weapons and ammunition almost anywhere. If we cut their supply lines, they adapt. They start making what they need locally. Thex Van nodded. The humans are preparing for a long war. Not a quick conquest, but a grinding conflict, where territory means less than resilience. They've studied how empires fall, and they've built their civilization to avoid those weaknesses. General Crix looked uncomfortable. Supreme Commander, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we're not looking at a simple military operation. We're looking at a test. The humans want to know how we'll respond to resistance. If we attack Haven Colony and suffer heavy casualties, they learn that seeding colonies with combat specialists works. Other species will learn it too. Our reputation as an invincible fleet will be damaged. But if we retreat, Admiral Toss said, we look weak. Do we? Thex Van asked. Or do we look smart? Think about it. We've identified a trap. We've assessed the cost of springing that trap. We've made a strategic decision to avoid unnecessary casualties. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The High Command won't see it that way, General Crix argued. They expect us to take this colony. Our orders are clear. Thex Van was about to respond when Vrel interrupted. Sir, I'm receiving a priority message from Command. It's addressed to you personally. Highest encryption. Put it through. The face of Grand Admiral Rexus appeared on the screen. Rexus was old, even by Vakrian standards, over 300 years. He had fought in every major war of the past century. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Supreme Commander Thex Van, I have reviewed your intelligence reports on Haven Colony. I have also received additional information from our agents within human territory. Information you do not yet have. Thex Van felt a chill. Yes, Grand Admiral? The human you identified, Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun, is not at Haven Colony by accident. Our agents report that the United Earth Defense Force has been monitoring our fleet movements. They anticipated our expansion into this sector. They deliberately positioned high-value operatives at vulnerable colonies. So it is a trap, Thex Van said. Yes. But there's more. Rexus leaned forward. Our intelligence indicates that human forces are currently moving into position elsewhere. Not here. Not at Haven Colony. But at our supply depots in the Kelvar system. While we commit our third fleet to a difficult siege, they plan to strike at our logistics network. Thex Van felt his suspicion confirmed. They're using Haven Colony as bait. Love. Correct. If you proceed with the invasion, you'll be tied down for weeks, possibly months. Your fleet will be unable to respond to threats elsewhere, and the casualties you suffer will make us look vulnerable to other species. The humans are not fighting for Haven Colony. They're fighting to shape galactic perception of human military capability. What are your orders, Grand Admiral? Rexus paused. That's why I'm contacting you personally, Supreme Commander. The decision is yours, but understand the full picture. This is not about one colony. This is about whether we let humans dictate the terms of engagement. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. Thexvan looked at his officers. They stared back, waiting for his decision. The weight of command settled on his shoulders. Thexvan spent the next 6 hours running simulations. He used every piece of data they had collected, every report on human tactics, every psychological profile, every historical battle. The ship's computers calculated thousands of scenarios, each one slightly different. Different approach vectors, different timing, different troop deployments. The results were consistent. They could take Haven Colony. But the cost kept climbing. Best case scenario, 40% casualties. That assumed the colonists fought poorly, that Kang Daehyun couldn't effectively organize them, that the humans made mistakes. It was possible, but unlikely. Nothing in Kang's record suggested he made mistakes. Worst case scenario, 75% casualties. That assumed Kang implemented every tactic from his combat history, that he trained civilians effectively, that he used the environment to maximum advantage, that he employed psychological warfare to break Vakrian morale. It was possible, maybe even probable. Most likely scenario, 58% casualties. Almost 12,000 soldiers, dead or wounded. To capture a colony worth perhaps a few million credits in resources and strategic value. The mathematics were clear. This was a terrible trade. But mathematics didn't account for honor or reputation. Thexvan called another meeting. This time, he invited additional staff, medical officers to estimate casualty treatment capacity, engineers to assess colony fortifications, even cultural advisors to analyze human psychological responses. I want everyone to understand what we're facing. Thexvan began. This is not a standard military operation. The humans have turned warfare into something different. Something we need to understand. He pulled up footage from previous human conflicts. Videos captured by intelligence drones, satellite surveillance, even recordings from human news broadcasts. The officers watched in silence. One video showed human soldiers defending a research station. They were outnumbered 3-1. Standard protocol would be to evacuate. Instead, they barricaded themselves inside and fought for 2 weeks. When rescue finally arrived, the soldiers had used furniture as weapons. They had created explosives from laboratory chemicals. One soldier had continued fighting with a broken leg and several broken ribs. They all survived. The attacking force lost 60% of its troops. Another video showed a human civilian ship attacked by pirates. The ship had no weapons, no military personnel, just a crew of 20 operating a cargo vessel. When the pirates boarded, the crew fought back with tools, bare hands, and improvised weapons. They killed 7 pirates before the rest retreated. The humans suffered casualties, but they won. A third video showed something even stranger. A human agricultural colony under attack. The colonists, mostly farmers with no military training, had organized a defense using farm equipment. They turned tractors into battering rams. They created barriers from irrigation pipes. They used fertilizer to make bombs. Against all logic, they held until military support arrived. This is what we're facing, Thexvan said. Not just soldiers, but an entire species that refuses to accept defeat. Dr. Yenix, the fleet's senior medical officer, raised a clawed hand. Supreme Commander, I've reviewed the casualty projections. Our medical facilities can handle perhaps 3,000 wounded at a time. If your simulations are correct, we'll have 4 times that number. We don't have the resources to treat them all. What happens to the soldiers we can't treat? General Crix asked. Dr. Yenix looked uncomfortable. They die. Or they suffer permanent disabilities. Either way, they're lost to us. The room fell silent. These were no longer abstract numbers. These were real soldiers, people they commanded, who would die or be crippled because of decisions made in this room. There's another factor, Colonel Vrel said. Political consequences. I've been monitoring communications from our government. Other species are watching this operation. If we suffer heavy casualties taking a small colony, it sends a message. The Vakrian Empire is vulnerable. Humans can defeat us through attrition. But if we retreat, Admiral Tos countered, we send a different message. We're afraid of humans. That's worse, is it? Thexvan asked. What's more damaging to our reputation? Strategic withdrawal to avoid a trap, or losing half our fleet to capture one minor colony? No one had a good answer. Thexvan pulled up a new file. I asked Vrel to analyze the broader strategic situation. What happens after we take Haven Colony? Assuming we succeed, and our casualties are within acceptable limits, what comes next? Vrel stood up. I've mapped out the most likely scenarios. If we take Haven Colony, the humans will respond. Not with military force, at least not immediately. They'll use diplomatic channels. They'll file protests with the Galactic Council. They'll share footage of civilian casualties. They'll make us look like aggressors. They'll diplomatic channels. We are aggressors, someone muttered. Vrel continued. The humans are good at public relations. They understand how to shape narratives. They'll turn Haven Colony into a symbol. A small, peaceful farming community destroyed by the evil Vakrian Empire. Other species will see that. Some will sympathize with humans. Some will fear that we'll attack them next. Let them fear us, General Crix said. Fear is useful. Is it? Vrel asked. Because fear also drives species to band together, to form alliances, to build defensive pacts. If we make humans into sympathetic victims, we might push other species into their arms. Thexvan nodded. That's my concern. We win one battle and lose the political war. The humans are thinking 3 steps ahead. They're not fighting for Haven Colony. They're fighting for galactic opinion. He pulled up another image. It showed human territory, surrounded by neutral zones and independent systems. Small species, newly spacefaring, trying to find their place in the galaxy. These species are watching us, Thexvan said. They're evaluating threats, deciding who to trade with, who to ally with, who to fear. Right now, they see humans as underdogs, newcomers trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. If we attack humans aggressively, we confirm their fears. We become the threat they need protection from. You're suggesting we let humans manipulate galactic politics? General Crix demanded. I'm suggesting we don't make it easy for them, Thexvan replied. Every action we take has consequences beyond the battlefield. We need to think like they do. Long-term. Strategic. Not just about winning battles, but about winning the peace that comes after. Captain Oryx, one of the younger officers, spoke up. Supreme Commander, I've been studying human history. There's a pattern. Humans don't fight wars to gain territory. They fight wars to exhaust their enemies. They trade space for time. They accept temporary defeats to achieve long-term victory. I think that's what they're doing here. Explain, Thexvan said. Haven Colony doesn't matter to them. Oryx continued. The 3,000 civilians, they matter. The soldiers matter. But the colony itself, the buildings and resources, those are replaceable. If we attack and they lose, they evacuate survivors and rebuild elsewhere. They lose nothing important. But we lose soldiers. We lose time. We lose political capital. We gain a colony that will be expensive to hold and defend. You think it's all calculated? Admiral Toss asked. I think humans are very good at making enemies win battles while losing wars, Oryx said. Thexvan appreciated the insight. The young captain understood something the older officers were missing. This wasn't about military capability. It was about strategy, at the highest level. Let me show you something else, Thexvan said. He pulled up intelligence reports on human economic activity. While we've been planning this operation, humans have been busy. They've signed trade agreements with 4 species. They've established cultural exchanges with 3 others. They've offered technological assistance to 2 developing civilizations. They're building relationships, creating dependencies, making themselves valuable to other species. So when we attack them, Vrel said, we're not just attacking humans. We're attacking trade partners, cultural friends, and technological allies of multiple other species. Exactly. The humans are making themselves too costly to fight. Not through military strength, but through economic and diplomatic integration. The meeting stretched into the evening. Officers presented arguments for and against the invasion. Medical staff explained casualty treatment limitations. Engineers detailed the difficulties of occupying a hostile colony. Cultural advisors warned about long-term resistance from civilian populations. Finally, as the ship's artificial night began, Thexvan called for silence. I've made my decision, he said. But before I announce it, I want each of you to answer one question honestly. If you were commanding this operation, if your name would be attached to the results, would you proceed with the invasion? He looked at General Crix first. The ground commander hesitated, then slowly shook his head. No, Supreme Commander. The casualties are too high for the strategic value gained. Admiral Tos was next. I would not proceed. The risk of fleet damage outweighs the benefits. One by one, every officer gave the same answer. No. They would not proceed. Then we are in agreement, Thexvan said. We will not attack Haven Colony. We will withdraw and report to High Command that the operation is strategically unsound. The presence of Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun and the likelihood of high casualties make this target too expensive. Command will not be pleased, Vrel said quietly. No. Thexvan agreed. But they will understand. And they will appreciate that we thought strategically rather than emotionally. We are not retreating in fear. We are declining to participate in a trap that humans have set for us. He looked at his officers, seeing relief on many faces. They were warriors, but they were also rational beings who understood cost versus benefit. Prepare the fleet for withdrawal, Thexvan ordered. We leave at dawn. The order rippled through the Vakrian fleet like a shockwave. Withdraw. Stand down. Return to staging areas. Many soldiers couldn't believe it. They had prepared for battle, sharpened their weapons, reviewed their assault plans. Now, they were leaving without firing a single shot. Thexvan watched the fleet reposition from his command chair. Ships broke orbit in precise formations, moving away from Haven Colony with military efficiency. It looked organized, professional, but he knew many of his soldiers were confused, maybe even angry. They saw this as surrender. He would need to address that. But first, he had a report to write. The message to Vakrian High Command took him 3 hours to compose. He chose his words carefully, knowing this document would be reviewed by the Grand Council, analyzed by military historians, and possibly used to judge his career. To Grand Admiral Rexus and the High Command Council, he began. After extensive intelligence gathering and strategic analysis, the Third Fleet has withdrawn from Haven Colony without engaging hostile forces. This decision was not made lightly. I believe it represents sound military judgment for the following reasons. He detailed everything. The combat record of Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun, the psychological profile of human military forces, the casualty projections, the political implications, the evidence that Haven Colony was bait in a larger strategic trap. But he also wrote something else. Something he had been thinking about since this operation began. The humans are teaching us something important about warfare in this new galactic age. Military strength alone does not determine victory. Reputation, diplomacy, economics, and psychological warfare matter just as much as ships and soldiers. The humans understand this. They are building a civilization designed not to defeat us in battle, but to make fighting them pointless. He continued. Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun's presence at Haven Colony was both a coincidence and a strategy. The humans position their best soldiers at vulnerable locations, knowing that their reputations alone might deter attacks. This is efficient. This is intelligent. This is warfare adapted to an age where species must coexist after conflicts end. I recommend that the Vakrian Empire reassess its expansion strategy. We can conquer colonies through force, but we cannot build lasting peace through intimidation alone. The humans offer us a different path. Competition through excellence rather than domination through violence. I suggest we consider this path seriously. He ended with a simple statement. The Third Fleet remains combat-ready and awaits new orders. Supreme Commander Thexvan. He transmitted the report and sat back, exhausted. The decision was made. Now, he would face whatever consequences came. On the bridge, Vrel approached him quietly. Supreme Commander, we're receiving a transmission from Haven Colony. Thexvan felt his pulse quicken. From their military? No, sir. From Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun. Personal message. Addressed to you. Put it through. Audio only. The bridge speakers crackled. Then a human voice filled the command center. It spoke in accented, but clear Vakrian language. Supreme Commander Thexvan. This is Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun of the United Earth Defense Force. I want to thank you for your decision. You have saved thousands of lives today, both human and Vakrian. That takes wisdom and courage. Thexvan said nothing, just listened. I want you to know something, Kang continued. If you had attacked, we would have fought. We would have made it cost you everything you had. Not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. Your blockade removed all options for retreat. You would have faced humans with nothing to lose. That would have been bad for everyone. But you chose differently. You chose to think rather than just react. You chose strategy over pride. That makes you more dangerous than any aggressive commander, because it makes you unpredictable. It makes you someone we must respect and watch carefully. There was a pause, then Kang spoke again, his voice softer. I have a daughter, Commander. Her name is Minji. She's 5 years old. She likes to draw pictures of spaceships and dream about visiting other worlds. Because of your decision today, she still has a future. My wife, Sora, still has a husband. 3,000 people here still have their lives. I don't know if you have a family, Commander, but if you do, go see them. Tell them you made a hard choice today, and it was the right one. Tell them that sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose not to fight. The transmission ended. The bridge was silent. Several officers looked uncomfortable. They had been prepared to fight this human, to see him as an enemy. Now he had thanked them. He had acknowledged their commander's wisdom. He had mentioned his daughter. It was effective psychological warfare, Thexvan realized. Even in peace, the humans were thinking strategically. They were turning potential enemies into people who had saved a child's life. It was brilliant. Vrel, Thexvan said. Make a note in your intelligence file on Kang Dae-hyun. Add this. Subject demonstrates advanced understanding of psychological operations, capable of humanizing conflict even when representing opposing force. Extremely dangerous because he makes enemies question their objectives. Yes, Supreme Commander. The fleet continued its withdrawal. As they cleared Haven Colony's orbit, Thexvan looked at the planet one last time. From space, it looked beautiful. Green and blue, covered in clouds, full of life. 3,000 humans down there were probably celebrating right now, grateful to be alive. He wondered if any of them understood how close they had come to war, how the presence of one soldier, one reputation, one combat record, had stopped an entire invasion fleet. Probably not. They would think the Vakrians were cowards. They would tell stories about how the mighty empire ran away from a small colony. Let them think that. Thex Van knew the truth. He hadn't run from weakness. He had avoided a trap. 3 days later, the response from High Command arrived. Thex Van read it alone in his quarters, expecting criticism or even demotion. Instead, Grand Admiral Rexus had written something unexpected. Supreme Commander Thex Van. Your strategic assessment has been reviewed and approved by the High Council. Your decision to withdraw from Haven Colony demonstrates the kind of thinking we need in this new era. You recognize that modern warfare extends far beyond the battlefield. Furthermore, intelligence confirms your suspicions. Human forces were indeed positioned to strike our supply lines while we were engaged at Haven Colony. Your withdrawal prevented significant losses in the Kelvar system. We estimate you saved 38 ships and thousands of personnel. The humans are proving to be unusual adversaries. They fight wars on multiple levels simultaneously: military, political, economic, and psychological. We must adapt our strategies to match their approach. You are hereby promoted to Grand Admiral and assigned to lead our strategic planning division. Your task is to develop new doctrine for engagement with human forces, emphasizing strategic restraint and long-term thinking. Your former command will be transferred to General Crix, who has also shown sound judgment during this operation. Thex Van read the message 3 times, hardly believing it. He had expected punishment. Instead, he had been promoted. The High Command understood. They saw what he saw. The galaxy was changing, and the Vakrian Empire needed to change with it. He composed a final report, this one for historical record. On this date, the Third Fleet withdrew from Haven Colony after determining that military victory would be strategically counterproductive. This decision was influenced by the combat record of Human Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun, whose presence represented both a tactical threat and a strategic message from the United Earth Defense Force. The lesson learned is clear. Modern warfare requires commanders who think beyond immediate victory. The humans understand this. They position their most capable soldiers not just to fight, but to deter fighting. They use reputation as a weapon more powerful than any gun. There are jest fighter from. There are gun too. Their vile reputation. Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun never fired a shot. He never even appeared on our sensors in a combat capacity. Yet he achieved a victory more complete than any battle could have provided. He protected his colony, avoided bloodshed, and forced a superior force to reassess its strategies. That is the mark of a true warrior. I recommend that the Vakrian Empire study human military philosophy carefully. Not to copy it, but to understand it. We are entering an age where reputation, strategy, and psychological warfare matter as much as physical force. The empire that adapts first will thrive. The empire that clings to old ways will fall behind. End report. Thex Van transmitted the document and stood up. He walked to his window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun was probably playing with his daughter, grateful for another day of peace. The sergeant would never know the full impact of his reputation, how his combat record alone had stopped a war, how his simple message of thanks had made an enemy commander see him as a person rather than a target. That was the power humans had. Not just their weapons or their determination, but their ability to make others see them as individuals worth protecting. As parents and children, spouses and friends, people who drew pictures of spaceships and dreamed of a peaceful future, Thex Van smiled, something he rarely did. The galaxy was more complex than he had imagined, more interesting too, and somewhere out there, a human 5-year-old named Minji was probably drawing another spaceship, never knowing that her father's reputation had saved her life. The Vakrian fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Haven Colony in peace, and in his new role as Grand Admiral, Thex Van began the long work of teaching his species that sometimes the bravest warriors are the ones who choose not to fight. The war that never happened became the most important victory neither side ever claimed. And across the galaxy, other species took note. The Vakrian Empire had chosen wisdom over aggression. The humans had chosen deterrence over destruction. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was learning a better way. On Haven Colony, Staff Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun received a message from his commander. "Well done, Sergeant. You didn't fire a shot and stopped a war. That's the best kind of victory. Enjoy your time with your family. You've earned it." Kang deleted the message, picked up his daughter, and went outside to watch the sunset. The sky was clear now. No warships blocking the stars. Just open space, full of possibilities. "Dad," Minji asked, "why are there so many stars?" "Because the universe is big," Kang answered, "and there's room for everyone." His daughter thought about that, then nodded. "I like that." "So do I," Kang said. "So do I."